Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, December 29th, 2017. Just checking the date here to make sure that I have the right year. I just have a big calendar that says the year on it. I check that each day. And it's still 2017, as it turns out. And this is the last live show of 2017. In fact, look, it's the last show of 2017, period. No need to qualify it. I'm not coming back tomorrow. It's Saturday. I'm going to take the day off. Daily Co's Radio is live now, as Bill reminds us, all the way from Portland, Maine, with the same comment. I stole it from that. This is the last live show of 2017, and I'll be announcing that with astonishment, as it turns out. Are you ready? I am astonished. Oh, I'm going to announce this with astonishment. I never read even the shortest documents, tweets, all the way to the end. Why bother? The president is a moron. I don't see why I should have to do any work. What am I going to announce with astonishment? Hey, Trump didn't get us all killed yet. That is true. I do feel that way. And it is rather surprising. And I don't know. Here's the big news of the day. One, we're still in a tuberculosis ward. Two, Donald Trump does not have that tuberculosis. I wonder if I could arrange for that. And I guess three, really the top story. Donald Trump spoke unstaffed, as it turns out. I don't know that it would have made any difference, but spoke unstaffed and unsupervised to the New York Times for about half an hour yesterday. And so they have a big interview up with him, and it's the subject of some controversy. I have mixed feelings about the fact that it took place also. We'll discuss some of that. Maybe Armando will join us and rant a little bit about that and some other things. We'll continue our discussion from tomorrow if he happens to be free. Otherwise, I have plenty to tell you. The president rambled unsupervised for half an hour to Mike Schmidt of, did I have it? Is that right? Is it Schmidt of the New York Times? Interesting story about the story. We could probably talk for 2 hours about the interview itself without actually reading the interview. There's just a lot going on. One, of course, is that Mike Schmidt, why is he in position to have this interview? They did not arrange this. I did see some tweets last night, which were kind of funny, about other reporters asking White House staffers late at night, hey, what do you think of the president's interview with the New York Times today? And they say, today? The New York Times? How? Whoa, humana. What did he say? We weren't supposed to have that. We didn't prepare him for that. What? Really? They were just flabbergasted. And, by the way, it's like the end of the year. I'm like all out of flabbers, and I haven't gasted one in I don't know how long. Oh, this is a national shortage. We're all too flabbergasted these days. They were caught by surprise. The deal is that Mike Schmidt was having lunch at Mar-a-Lago when I guess the president came tottering in after another day of golf, which is a whole other thing. And see, he was having lunch with Chris Ruddy from is he Newsmax? He's the publisher, editor-in-chief. I don't know. He's the head guy at Newsmax, which is a wingnut publication for idiots. And he's great friends with Donald Trump and a Mar-a-Lago member. There you have it. And Ruddy makes a habit of hanging around at Mar-a-Lago because the president, who is a moron, thinks Chris Ruddy is great. Chris Ruddy praises him to the heavens all the time and hangs around and makes himself available by paying his $200,000 to Mar-a-Lago. And he's always being consulted by the president. They're close, which means that when they finally indict Chris Ruddy for something, I don't know that he's done anything wrong, Chris Ruddy, but if they ever do indict him, Trump will say, I don't know him. So, but he's constantly around like the Forrest Gump of Mar-a-Lago. He's insinuating himself into all the interviews. He's arranging the interviews. He's there when the North Koreans are launching missiles. He's all over the place. Chris Ruddy is. And one of the few people who gets interviewed or talked to as a source by the press fairly frequently, who actually has some idea what's going on and what's rattling around in Trump's brain because he's there all the time. So, I mean, he's a good source. And again, we'll get to whether or not this interview was worth anything or was done right. Is the New York Times at fault for something a little later? I'm sure maybe that's where Armando will want to come in and shout about things. But so Chris Ruddy is hosting Mike Schmidt for lunch. I don't know why, but, you know, people had all kinds of speculation. The deal probably is this. Ruddy knows that any reporter he invites to come to lunch at Mar-a-Lago is likely to be on hand when Trump comes tottering around. I don't really have any other word for it than that. He comes rattling around Mar-a-Lago. When he's not golfing, he wants to go around and visit and kibitz with people. It's like, you know, my grandparents. It's a wonder we don't have endless video of him playing mahjong. But he loves to go around and talk to, which was fine as a private guy and a retiree, but instead he's the president. Okay, so he wants to go talk to the real people of America. Sure. And Schmidt is there largely because if you hang around where Trump hangs around, you know, if you want to run into him, hang around at the steakhouse in his hotel, hang around at the golf club, hang around at Mar-a-Lago, whatever, and you'll run into him eventually, and he'll do something dumb like talk to you. And so Ruddy invites Schmidt, I'm sure figuring, well, Schmidt will appreciate this and maybe use me as a source fairly often, and I'll get quoted in the New York Times as a smart guy who knows what's going on in Donald Trump's head. And he is that. I don't know how smart he is, but he knows what's going on in Donald Trump's head. He's smart enough to position himself to know that stuff and to know that the New York Times will find it to be valuable, and that the New York Times is largely thought to be valuable by the rest of us. And so people will come to think of Chris Ruddy as a player instead of as the publisher of a idiot news site, which is, you know, what the rest of us are. Anyway, so he does that favor for Schmidt. Schmidt says, sure, what the hell, I'll do it. I mean, there's lots of things like, oh, well, access journalism and lots of complaints about that stuff. But if you want to talk to the president for whatever reason, that's a smart play, right? Get in good with Chris Ruddy. He'll invite you to lunch. The president will wander by, and then you'll have an interview. So I don't blame anybody for that, really. So, sure enough, he comes around. I bring up Chris Ruddy and his deal with bringing people as guests to Mar-a-Lago because in part of the interview, which is written up in the New York Times, and they also published a partial transcript of the proceedings. And I always do appreciate getting the transcript because you see the raw Trump and how much his windmonders. Holy cow. Maybe I just got Trump disease. Mind wanders. Holy moly. Is it Friday? Is it catching? Is that what's happening here? Let's see. Oh, what's this? Washington Post reporter already en route to interview him. Okay, who says this? Okay. Alex Armstrong. I'm talking about something different. Okay. Don't worry about it, Alex. I mixed it up. We'll figure this out. So, Schmidt hangs around, gets the interview. Fine. Why is Chris Ruddy of interest in all this? Part of the interview tells us that at some point he is asked by Schmidt about, I don't even remember how they get to it, but they talk about Alan Dershowitz comes up. Dershowitz is mentioned, and Trump goes on at some length about how Dershowitz has great things to say about him, and he's a really smart lawyer. But he says, I don't know him. You know, I don't know him. He's defending me. He's saying great things about me. And he's a Democrat. He's a liberal Democrat. So, you know, that's really got to be true because he's a liberal Democrat would have no reason to say anything good about me. You know, I've been spoon feeding him for however long, but whatever. Now he says something good about me. But I don't know him. I'm saying I don't know him. Why? So that you don't know that he's been a frequent guest at Mar-a-Lago, and we comp him on things, and we give him all sorts of things, and we pamper the guy, and I've known him for a long time, and he's a sucker for getting bribed by me, and he says great things about me, but now you'll believe them because I don't know him. He knows him. Of course he knows him. Not only does he know who he is, of course, he sees him on television all the time, and that's how he discusses him. I see him on TV, that's all. P.S. I don't watch TV, but I see him on TV, that's all. The reason I bring it up is Dershowitz has had personal conversations with Trump. Yes, he knows him. They've met him. He talked to him extensively. When he was a dinner guest of Chris Ruddy's at Mar-a-Lago. that's when. I don't remember when it happened, but it was, it came up in the papers because he's sitting there at dinner with Chris Ruddy, and along comes the president, tottering along once again, kibitzing with the guests at Mar-a-Lago, like old Mr. Kellerman walking around the camp in Dirty Dancing. Anyway, he sees Dershowitz, and he comes over and he asks him about, for like legal advice and about the travel ban, which of course isn't a travel ban, except it is a travel ban. I say it's a travel ban all the time, and if you use that against me in court, you're wrong. I never said it was a travel ban, but it's a travel ban. And he comes back to the table twice to grill him about the legality of it and to ask him for follow-up advice and arguments to make. But now he's like, I don't know him. And I tweeted around somewhere last night a screen caps of the stupid page 6 write-ups of it. This is what Trump does. He rattles around his stupid club and he talks to whoever Chris Ruddy brings him and then says, I don't know him. So the whole interview is nuts. As usual, it's random, rambling crap. And he proves himself to be a complete idiot. And that's the long and short of it. We can parse through it and discuss some of the particulars in his claim to genius, in his actual idiocy. But another big controversy surrounding all of this was fights with the New York Times people on Twitter yesterday about, was it a good idea or is it responsible to interview the president and let him ramble and just print what he says and let it go unchallenged? And I'm not exactly sure that's entirely what the New York Times is doing here. I mean, that's one description of what they did. He does ask questions. It's not just an open microphone thing. But the issue was, well, why don't you challenge him on anything? When you see him or hear him just make a blatant lie? Why don't you say, hey, that's not true? Or, when he says, I did this or that policy, can you explain that? Because he can't, and he has no idea what he's talking about. But they don't do that in this interview. And the reason they give in the long argument, there's lots of people like, well, why do you do that? What's the point of interviewing him? He's a liar. Yes, he rambles for half an hour, but he doesn't tell you anything that's true, so there can't be any news value in it. But I don't know that that's really true. He's a unique case. That's for sure. And New York Times reporters like Maggie Haberman pushing back and saying, look, unscripted Trump is the real Trump, and you gain insight into what's going on in his head with these sorts of interviews. And if you, it's not always the case, but if you make the interview aggressive, if you challenge him on everything, if you say you're lying on all these things, he tends to shut down. And then he doesn't continue the interview. And this is an unscheduled interview, and he's walked out of scheduled interviews. So you're not going to get your story if you do that. And of course, some people are of the mind that, well, then who cares? There's no story unless the challenge is the story here. Others say, no, the unscripted rambling that reveals what's in his head is of value. That's the story. I have mixed feelings. I think I like, in general, to see these things. And I love that they print the transcripts along with it. And I think that's a good thing to do. I think it would be useless or near useless without that. We occasionally get juicy quotes, but if it's very often the unrefined, uncleaned up, raw quote that's more revealing of what's really happening in Trump's head. For him to make a policy statement and have that quoted in the paper, and then to find out in the transcript that was really pulled from 5 minutes of rambling interjections, from a scattered mind, is more interesting. Right? I think so. So lots of pushback on the New York Times, lots of pushback from the New York Times. You got to do these things. You don't have to do these things. You should do. Basically, I sum it up this way, and I tweeted it this morning, and I guess I just feel better about the whole thing if there was some indication somewhere that the Times reporters understood what they were dealing with and that they wanted everyone who was reading to understand exactly what was going on, like a note at the top that would say something like, as I put it this morning, look, the president says He doesn't watch TV, but every morning we see him tweeting exactly what's on Fox and Friends. And he says, I don't play golf, I work too hard, I'm having meetings, etc., etc. And everyone can see him walking to the car in golf clothes, and someone's carrying golf clubs. And then we see pictures of him and video of him on the golf course, and they still continue to say, no, he's not playing golf. He doesn't watch TV. He's too busy for golf and TV. But in actuality, that is all he does all day long, and we all know it. So, with that in mind, here's some other things that the president says, and take them with that grain of salt. By the way, Chris Cillizza announcing to the world at 9:09 a.m. the motorcade arrived at Trump International Golf Club. He's back for a fourth day in a row of not playing golf one more time, and he's gonna deny golfing. It's crazy. And so really, honestly, I mean, you think I'm kidding, but that's what it should say at the top of the interview. Because what's the point of reading the rest of it if you know that it's likely to be garbage? If you're not armed with that information, right? By the way, Armando is talking to other people about this. He's just not talking to us about it. So there, he's retweeting Chris Ruddy's tweet here, who is talking about Donald Trump. He says, Donald Trump respects New York Times Mike Schmidt because he's fair. Glad to connect them at Trump International! ! Oh, I guess so. He must have been tottering around, not at Mar-a-Lago, but at the golf club. So Chris Ruddy just places himself wherever he knows this, rolling mound of garbage is going to ramble up to next, and then brings who he wants to bring to put the two of them in touch, which is problematic in its own right. Armando is responding to Ruddy here, saying also, too, Schmidt was and look at this. I don't think I would have connected this. He's the New York FBI office conduit for their anti-Hillary leaks, really. Also, Clinton Cash. This isn't to say Schmidt is a bad reporter. He can be quite good, but he's cultivated Trump's, quote, respect. And that's always going to be problematic in its own right. So this was about access journalism in many ways, and how valuable is it, and what should you be doing in order to get that access, and what should you not allow yourself to do in order to get that access. So here's what they produced. I mean, among other things, let's see. I don't even know if I put the interview itself aside here. I just figured it would come up in the course of conversation and we'd read through it. But let's go to the New York Times. I mean, I'm sure it's on the front page. We'll just do it raw like this. I didn't have to put this one aside. And should we read the write-up or the interview transcript? Or maybe we could just hit on comments that people are pulling out of there and making comments on this morning on Twitter. Maybe that's the more valuable way of dealing with it than actually reading through the transcript, because that could take forever. And we'll get lost on the way and just want to comment on every single thing. Anyway, let's see. The very last thing before I went on the air to strike me was that from the interview, all right, and there, of course, is a link to the interview, is this quote, "I'm the one who saved coal." I like to read these things in order to get the context, before and after, but I don't know exactly where this appears in the interview. But I'm the one that saved coal. I'm the one that created jobs. West Virginia is doing fantastically now. West Virginia is never doing fantastically. No one's saved coal. There haven't been any jobs created. Again, right? Now, that's no shocker. You know that. I haven't told you anything you didn't know before. I haven't told Mike Schmidt anything he doesn't know before. Quite frankly, I probably haven't even informed Trump of something he doesn't actually know. Maybe. It's very difficult to tell the difference between the lies, his own lies that he believes, and the ones he's just hoping someone else will believe. And someone does believe that. As I said, also, somewhere in West Virginia, there are several of them. It's not just one. But somewhere in West Virginia, there's a coal miner who isn't working right now and doesn't know anyone who is working in a coal mine right now, or certainly doesn't know anyone who lost their job in a mine who's gone back to work in a coal mine since Trump took office. And he knows that West Virginia is not doing fantastically now, but believes the president anyway. It must be some other part of West Virginia where all the I wonder where it is. I should look that up in a newspaper and maybe go get one of these jobs. But it's not happening. But they believe it either will, or it did, or the newspaper is lying, or something. And I don't know how you deal with that. Everybody's tearing their hair out. Ezra Klein spent yesterday tearing his hair out. How do we deal in a democracy with a situation where vast swaths of the population have no idea what's going on and no idea what's true about the basic state of the country? I think he was reacting to a poll that said something like 40+% of the country is convinced in our poll that Trump repealed Obamacare, that it's over, there's no Obamacare. And how do you have, anything, a discussion, an election, a government where 40% of the people have no idea whether Proposition A is true or not? How do you ask people to vote for, make an informed decision about who you want to be president or represent you in Congress? Blah, blah, blah. How do you do it if you don't have any idea what's going on? Or all you have is a false idea of what's going on? And the answer is, I don't know. You don't. You can't. And I don't know why Ezra Klein didn't think of this a year ago. But he was being cautious. He was approaching this, responsibly, I guess. So, right, you got excerpts like this. You got excerpts like he told somebody, once again with the I'm a super genius. I understand everything better than anybody. What did I see this quote somewhere? Oh, yeah, here we are. The Hill pulled this quote out. I know the big bills in Congress better than any president that's ever been in office. I also saw I don't know whether it was from this interview or not, but once again, it might have been from the interview. He's asked about China policy, and more specifically about them selling oil to North Korea. That's simple enough to ask the president about. He'll understand. I don't like that. And that came up. And again, he talks about, I like China. I like the president of China. He treated me so good when I was there. And then, of course, he said, takes time out to say, they treated me better than anybody who's ever visited in the history of China. What the hell are you talking about? I almost lost it there. This should be the show will be full of bleeps today when we get around to the podcast. Well, who says anything? First of all, what do you know about the history of China? Nothing. It's not possible. And I don't know if you know this. The history of China, very long history there. It's longer than a show on Fox News. It's huge. So longer than golf, even. Even the history of golf isn't really very long compared to the history of China. Do you know how long it took them to come up with chop suey? I mean, come on, please. It's forever. I know, that's not Chinese. I'm talking about, that's Donald Trump here. The history of China? Are you retarded? What's wrong with you? There you go. There, I've given ourselves something I should be bleeping and be ashamed of saying, and I can't help it. Are you dotarded? That's what I should have said. As the rude pundit said, dotard, the tard you're allowed to say. That's about as close as I can come to unleashed here. I'm able to keep myself from saying actual, profanities, but that's pretty damn close. I understand, and I apologize. I shouldn't be saying that. I trained myself very well. Every time you hear me say, really, here's an admission for you. Every time you hear me say, wind up on the R and say, that is so ridiculous. I mean to be saying the other word that I correctly prevent myself usually from saying, but I don't know. I don't have a word strong enough. It hurts people. It's terrible. I don't know what else to say. Nothing has the impact of that word. This guy is a moron, and I don't know what to do about it. I know that doesn't mean I should be hurting anybody else. I apologize for that. But I'm looking at I know the big bills in Congress better than any president that's ever been in office. I was treated better than anyone in the history of China. Are you kidding me? How do you live? How do you eat your own breakfast? How do you digest? How could there be anything going on? I have no medulla oblongata. I'm a waste of space. And I walk around. And because somebody gave me money when they died, I now walk around like an important guy. I don't know what it's a recurring problem in our country. Money plus suit plus complete moron still means important person in this country, and that's dangerous. What else? I mean, there are a few other things in here, and I guess we could parse through them. He loves to tell everybody once again he's back to the Electoral College thing. He says, I think 20 something times in here, there was no collusion with Russia. I don't collude with Russia. And as we were pointing out, again, up at the top, if you just say, he says he doesn't watch television, and then he tweets about what's on television all day. He said he doesn't play golf, and everybody on the golf course can see him and tweets pictures of him on the golf course. He's playing golf. Now he says 20 times there's no collusion. There's collusion. Of course there's collusion. And if you didn't have any other evidence of it, all you'd need was him saying there was none to know there was collusion. But of course he goes on, I didn't deal with Russia. And then he goes on to explain why he won. I won because I was the better candidate by a lot. I won because I campaigned properly, and she didn't. She campaigned for the popular vote. I campaigned for the Electoral College. He didn't. He just did this thing, whatever. But then he goes on to explain it. You know, the Electoral College, it's like a track star. Yeah, the Electoral College is that's it. It's like a track star. You cracked the case. Excellent job. Finally, I've always wondered, what is the Electoral College and what is it like? Well, it's like a track star. If you're going to run the 100-yard dash, you work out differently than if you're going to run the 1,000 meters or the mile. And it's different. In case you didn't get it, it's like it's in golf. Really? If you have a tournament and you have match play or stroke play, you prepare differently, believe it or not. It's different. That's actually somewhat close to astute about golf. But about the rest of it, I don't know. More, I guess, after this, if we agree to come back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. I think I've gathered myself somewhat composed here. Apologies for the last segment. We'll do it again, almost certainly. And one day I'll make the same mistake again. I'm pretty sure that that's true. That's just one of those things that's ingrained on me as a kid that grew up on the playgrounds in the 70s. We still think this thing, even if we train ourselves mostly not to say it. It's a fault, and it's underlying everything I do. Be aware of it. And I guess if we make too much of it, I might think it about you. So we'll approach with caution for the rest of the day. Yeah, we could read the rest of this. I think probably the better approach is simply to discuss what's going on around the periphery of it. During the break, I saw Simon Malloy tweeting. Again, like I say, mixed feelings about this. I'm glad we have this transcript because, I don't know, it's just mounting evidence of his unfitness for office. Not that that seems to be doing us any damn good, but maybe it's a long play. But at the same time, I have feelings like Simon does here, where he says, I am dubious of the, quote, just letting him talk gives us his unfiltered thoughts, unquote, defense of the New York Times Trump interview. Congrats on breaking through that famous Donald Trump thoughts filter. I mean, I cannot argue with that. There is, well, it gives us access to his unfiltered thoughts. He tweets them every morning. But here we get them in long form. And even though they've doubled his character capacity, a half-hour interview is more like a tweet storm, I guess. And we get more access to what's going on inside his stupid mind. So, yes, let's see. I guess just to wrap things up, Grudge, our Twitter friend Grudging One, That's the number one at the end of the word grudging, in case you'd like to follow along. Saying what I was saying about this, where I was like, there should be the disclaimer up at the top. The guy lies about everything, but here's what he said. He says exactly it. No collusion is factually and intentionally identical to no golf and no TV. He wants you to think X when the reality is Y, so he says X is true even though we see him doing Y, and he's convinced himself that he's the smartest guy, not only in the room, in the world. He literally has said in the past, when he brags about his I have a really good brain, and he's said, I have a high IQ, which is something that people typically with high IQs, unless they're talking to the doctor that measured it, don't ever bother to say about themselves. It's just, anyway. He loves to say, I got a high IQ, but he has at times claimed, I have the highest IQ ever measured. I don't know if you know this. Not a lot of people know this, but in the history of people in China or otherwise measuring IQs, it turns out it's just true. I'm not bragging. I'm just telling you the truth. I have the highest IQ ever measured in the world, in the history of the world, the history of the universe, really. And they give these IQ tests on all planets. I'm telling you. So that's the way you should be considering what's going on. Let's say this morning he's also angry about the post office because I guess, I assume at some point somebody will tell me at what time, at what hour exactly, Fox and Friends complained about the post office, because that's unprompted, apparently. Other than that, Donald Trump is tweeting this morning, why is the United States Post Office, which is losing many billions of dollars a year, while charging Amazon and others so little to deliver their packages, why are they making Amazon richer and the post office dumber and poorer? Should be charging much more. There's a kernel of truth in it somewhere, right? I don't know why, for instance, they bother giving Amazon a break, but the reality of it is, well, they would go and find another carrier and they're worth billions of dollars, et cetera, et cetera. So it's better to get a piece of it than to get nothing by holding on to a high price. But of course, then the first thing he says is they should be charging much more, which, by the way, thanks a lot, Mr. President. Everyone wants to know that postal prices should be higher. You poor people don't understand how good you got it. Why am I subsidizing your postage? You're so dumb. You should be paying more money. That's essentially what he's saying, but whatever. The television told him to say it. So there you go. Also, of course, he doesn't watch TV. So he's tweeting, while the fake news loves to talk about my so-called low approval rating, the actual one, of course, Fox and Friends, which he actually tags, and this just showed that my rating was approximately the same as President Obama on December 28th, 2017 versus 2009, which was 47%. And this despite massive negative Trump coverage and Russia hoax. So I don't watch TV. I'm just telling you, I just watched TV because I have such a huge IQ. You little people with dumb IQs will not be able to understand the truth of my saying I don't watch TV when I just tweeted to you that I'm watching TV. That's how dumb you people are. That's what we're supposed to believe. Likewise, more from earlier this morning. I shouldn't even bother to tell you this. If you were following the Twitter feed, yeah, I read my own Twitter feed sometimes on the radio. I wish we were on the radio when I was tweeting. And I don't know, maybe I should not bother with a disclaimer. If you read it, terrific. It seems like it ruins the joke. But some of you didn't read it, so I should just go ahead. If you ever wondered, this all prompted me to think, if you ever wondered what you would have gotten from a President Palin, think about that for just a second, because right now, of course, Sarah Palin is nobody and nothing and isn't getting anywhere near the office. But for a while there, we were supposed to consider her a legitimate contender for the office. And had McCain won the election, she would have been there. She would have been the vice president of the United States, and there would have been anything we could have done about it. Who knows? She might have quit, whatever. I don't know. There might have been a scandal that forced her out of office. I don't know. But if you were ever wondering, I'm sure at the time people thought, but what are we going to do if this idiot becomes vice president? Hopefully nothing happens, whatever. She's vice president. She doesn't do anything. She wastes her days away doing whatever, blah, blah, blah. Maybe, though, preparing to run for president, as many vice presidents do. I don't know whether she would have been successful at it. Who can tell anything now? Donald Trump won, so I don't know. But, of course, they're different people, and they are very different people. This is one of the things. If you ever wondered what would a President Palin be like without wondering how she becomes president, by the way, I mean, thanks a lot, John McCain, et cetera, for ruining everything. You set this off. You set the Donald Trump trap for us. I know you say you're anti-Trump in many ways, but, Donald Trump is president because everybody said, well, I don't know, a guy who's supposedly serious and smart said Sarah Palin was fit to be vice president, and that's really supposed to be tantamount to saying she's fit to be president in case I die or something happens to me. Oh, but nothing will happen to me. Meanwhile, he's currently now, of course, suffering with terminal brain cancer. But he would have finished his term in office, I suppose. He would have been done just when Obama was. But who knows what the stress of office might have done to this whole thing. And we might have ended up with a President Palin. Or she would have run to succeed him, and who knows. Not that I think he would have had a successful enough presidency for her to have a real hope of winning. But the real point here is the question crossed people's minds. What do we do if a moron becomes president? Now, I've had people tell me this in various forms for many years. It's actually okay if we have a moron as president because he or she will surround themselves with good people or, people who know what they're doing, even if they're evil people, as they surely would be in a Trump or Palin presidency. But they'll know what they're doing. The government pretty much runs itself, which I guess is sort of a deep state theory of how things work. And, there won't be that much they can do. The president can't really do that much, et cetera, et cetera. And it's going to be fine. They'll be surrounded by smart-ish, decent-ish people who know how to work the levers of government. It'll be fine. In fact, of course, here we are with Donald Trump, and the people around him are just as dumb, plus evil, on top of it all, as he is, and the government is not running. It's a disaster. It's mostly vacant. We're insulting our allies left and right. We have UN ambassadors who are allegedly one of the smarter people in the administration answering prank phone calls, talking to people that they think are journalists, but they're in fact pranksters, and asking for and getting comments on made up countries. I don't know what to tell you. But if you ever wondered what President Palin would have visited upon us, all you need to do now, of course, is just look around you. This is about how policy-wise, this is about how badly things would have come out. To top it all off, though, Sarah Palin was never and still isn't dumb enough to say about herself that I know all the big bills in Congress better than any president that's ever been in office, that I have the highest IQ ever measured, that they treated me better than anybody in the history of China. How about the emperor? How did he do? They probably treated him very well. No, she knew her limitations in a way, in a strange way. I guess compared to Donald Trump, Sarah Palin is a person who knew her limitations. She is famously a person who did not know her limitations. She's most famous for not knowing her limitations or understanding what her capacity for anything really was, and not being self-aware enough to know that I really don't have any business running for public office of any kind. Maybe mayor, whatever. I'm not saying mayors are dumb. Mayors, you're very smart. If you're mayors, get back to work. If you're listening to this show, honest to God, your city's falling apart. What are you doing? But, okay. So small town where the chief obligation of the mayor is, make sure nobody screws anything up. And nobody does because it's a small town and nothing horrible is happening this day. And then when something terrible happens, it's the police's issue, and you say, I support cops and rada. So, okay, it's fine. A president of the United States, of course, you have to think about things, make decisions, proactively act on things. It wasn't going to work for Sarah Palin. But although she was too dumb to see that she couldn't handle that, she was not so dumb that she would ever have said, not only can I handle it, I handle it great. I'm better than anybody. John F. Kennedy, idiot. John Adams, moron. Socrates? Yeah, right. You get the whole idea. She's not going to do that. And in fact, if anything, she probably once in a while would fall back on her church training and talk about her humility. That's never going to happen with Donald Trump. So again, no news here, whatever. And, but that's the morning happenings for me. I guess I had to rant about this. The other thing happening this morning, frustratingly enough, lots of, very serious people and pundits tweeting around, you got to read this. There's a must-read article on how to understand Trump, how to beat Trump. If you want to beat Trump, you got to think like Trump's supporters or whatever, all this stuff. Again, I reject all of this now out of hand. There are no must-read anythings about Donald Trump. He is a moron. He's reactionary. He's like droolingly stupid. And he doesn't know anything about anything. And the answer to all questions about what do you think about X is the opposite of Obama, because he's a jerk and I hate him. And that's all you need to know about Donald Trump. There's no reason to understand him. The way to beat him is, club his people over the head. Outvote him, obviously, is the real answer. And, thankfully, in the real world, every once in a while, we have Greg Dworkin comes by and says, is really only about 20% of the people out there have any interest in defending the guy. And he should be reasonably easy to beat. But we thought that the first time. But now at least we have, hopefully, the experience of realizing, oh my God, you really can ruin the government if you're a moron and in charge of it. So we'll see. Paula Appanese had written yesterday saying that she had similar thoughts and appreciated what Greg had to say. And I think that she was giving me permission to share some of these comments. She didn't want to, sit down and record the thing. It's just a short, brief comment she wrote to me in email saying that, the idea that a lot of people are sick of the chaos. That was what Joe Trippi was saying. That's what Greg was reading us and agreeing with, right? The idea that people are sick of the chaos is completely believable to me, and it is to me too. Now, how that translates, she says, into campaign strategizing for candidates around the country isn't clear at this point. Yes, perhaps bland Democrats, quote unquote, bland Democrats might be more likely to pull in disaffected Republicans in red or purple areas, maybe being less confrontational about how really reprehensible Trump and the GOP are would reduce people's natural tendency to dig in defensively. Of course, it should be pointed out, that's not what I'm doing here. I'm not actually trying to convince disaffected Republicans in red or purple areas about anything. That's not who's listening to the show. I know my audience, but I didn't need to convince them of anything. Anyway, that means I don't have a very hard job here. So, yeah, it would probably, drive people to dig in defensively if they really were Trump fans, and I said these things. But she goes on to say, I think it would be more a matter of tone than content. Greg's point that really resonated with me, though, was the idea of Democrats running, at least in part, on a kind of returning to normal. And then she notes for us, you, of course, remember her long-running series, 8-part series on GOP domestic abusers, not a factual compilation of the many times which Republican candidates and office holders were found to be domestic abusers, but considering the entire Republican Party and their approach to everything as a domestic abuser. You remember the story. In part 6 of the article, she says, she had written, we can describe Republican initiatives through the lens of political abuse and then offer a contrasting vision using the characteristics of a healthy, functioning democracy. Respect for all citizens and celebration of diversity, honesty, transparency, responsible governing, responsible exercise of official powers, representative government versus autocracy or theocracy, the separation of church and state, zero tolerance for political intimidation and violence. She concludes yesterday's comment by saying, I think Democratic candidates should talk a lot about how good government works and how good governing protects citizens, promotes their welfare, etc. And as Armando said, people will be voting for or against Trump whether he's mentioned or not. While we in the trenches can passionately hate Trump and nefarious Republicans, our candidates aren't as free, that's always true, to express themselves as we are. But they can show a lot of intensity around the importance of good governing, and they can freely criticize Trump and their Republican opponents for their flagrant violations of good governing. And I think that's largely true. there's a small part of me and probably all of you and the electorate at large which says, why aren't candidates as free to express themselves as we are? Or if not, asking that question, don't we wish sometimes that they were? And that's Donald Trump. You could very well argue, at least briefly, well, Donald Trump was as free with his commentary as his fans wished they could be. I mean, that was the major driving force for a lot of them. He tells it like it is. He says all the things that the rest of those politicians are afraid to say, but we're all thinking. And so, there's at least the start of an argument. Well, why won't we do that? Why can't we do that? If it won for them, why won't it win for us? And part of the answer is Trump fans think that's a good idea and they like it. Over on the other side, over here, it's like, I like that. I love that guy says that. I'm going to vote for him for Rude Pundit of the year, but I don't like governing that way. And even Trump fans, that's what Greg keeps reminding us. So this is the Greg Was Right show today, I guess. Greg keeps reminding us that lots and lots of Trump fans, this is code. This is their code for I don't like that he tweets, right? What they're saying is, I love that he says these things because I'm sick and tired of politicians beating around the bush about everything and parsing everything and being politically correct. Oh, God, that again, right? But I hate that he actually does it. I know that it isn't really a good idea. I know that it doesn't really help. It's great to have those ideas. Once in a while, it's great to show some passion. But every once in a while, you also need to remember this isn't the way we govern here. And to the extent that that's a worry that can be awakened, amplified, and exploited in those people, then that's an extent to which we can probably get, perhaps have a hope of stealing their vote away and saying, don't trust this anymore. Sure. Look, everybody's got the same passion. It's just, not everybody, but a lot of people have the same passion that he's got. It's just, the rest of us, wouldn't you rather have somebody who has that passion but is also smart? And by which I mean literally day-to-day life, smart enough not to say the dumbest crap that occurs to them out loud. And then say either I didn't say it or I did say it or and it was the smartest thing ever. Or worse, believe it or not, both. I didn't say that. And if I did, it was the smartest thing ever said in the history of saying things. What do you do with that? It's easy to be smarter than that, I think. So, there's lots of room on the passion scale, but this whole spectrum of smart is still wide open to us. You can outflank Trump on smart with your eyes closed, blindfolded, hands tied behind your back, hands chopped off. You'd be able to be smart. You don't need your hands to be smart. So, it's a dumb metaphor. Anyway, the point is there's a lot of room here and we ought to take advantage of it. Now, Paula sent me something else here. Having said that there's no must read anything that explains the president, she sent me a piece that explains the president. So here it is. I don't know. It doesn't. It's just, I don't know. It looked interesting. And it's not current. It's from August. David Roth writing in The Baffler on August 22nd. I don't even know what this means exactly. The president of blank sucking nullity. I don't know what that means. And then it's illustrated with a picture. Put a cone on it. It is Donald Trump with one of those dog ear protective cones on his head. And I don't know why. Anyway, and it's Trump explained, and it says this way in the subheader: from A-hole to B-hole, Trump explained. That's worth reading at least a few paragraphs, I would think, right? My father, it says, is convinced that his dog is embarrassed. He doesn't mean the rudimentary way that dogs ever show embarrassment, which, from my observation, amounts to taking several willful strides away from a mess they've made and then looking back disdainfully as if wondering what sort of ingrate would do that right there by the parking meter where everyone can see it. My dad understands his dog's shame as a more fraught and sorrowful thing, which is why he has taken to removing his dog's protective cone before taking her outside. He thinks that she, the dog, thinks other dogs are laughing at her. At the risk of belaboring things, dogs are animals that introduce themselves to their peers by assertively investigating those peers' beeholes. Their brains are the size of nectarines and in many cases not significantly more brain-like. They are just about the best creatures on this earth, but if you or my father believe that the dogs are embarrassed by the protective cones that veterinarians place on them, then you or my father are overthinking it. The dogs are inarguably inconvenienced by these cones, which is their purpose. The cones are prescribed by veterinarians because saying things like, "I'll need you to try to avoid licking these stitches for a week," or "I'm going to ask you to stop gnawing on that bacterial infection on your ass," is not going to work. The dogs do not like this, and they also may not like engaging with their peer dogs while wearing a goofy blunderbuss that keeps them from their habitual introductory beehole assessments and self-administered kamikaze junk ablutions. This is, I'm going to do my best to make sure we don't fall off the cliff here. I think the writing is pretty prescribed here, but okay. At some point, there's no real sense in guessing. You probably have gathered that this is about Donald Trump. Yeah, well, the picture gave it away. On August 12th, Trump and the world witnessed armed white supremacists on the streets and an attempted mass murder by an ISIS-preferred method, that is to say, driving the car into the crowd. P.S. Time out just for a second to say that I saw yesterday on Twitter Waldo Jackwith, who I follow and you may not, but you ought to. And it's Jacquuith, Waldo Jackwith, tweeting. He's a Charlottesville area resident. And he noted, for instance, that I thought this was fascinating. I thought Greg might find this interesting. They refer to the events just mentioned as August 12th in Charlottesville. And the rest of us, of course, all just say Charlottesville. And I thought that was kind of fascinating, just the same way that we all say Sandy Hook and Greg and the rest of the residents of Newtown say, 1214. It's interesting. And then I had somebody else chime into the conversation that people around Las Vegas refer to the massive Las Vegas shooting at the Mandalay Bay. When they refer to it at all, by the way, it's amazing that we have mostly forgotten. 600 people were shot by a single guy out of the window of a hotel room. I don't know. You and I haven't forgotten, but you know what I'm saying. But they refer to that as October 1st. And the rest of us, the Las Vegas shooting. It's an interesting, obviously, an innate psychological crutch of some kind. I'm not certain exactly what it means. It's clearly not anybody avoiding anything, but there's a sort of additional value to being part of the in crowd on this one. You know, the locals feel this way about it, and it impacts the locals differently than anybody else. And this is sort of a linguistic way of putting that. That has nothing to do with Donald Trump as dog, however. We were just saying, talking about the August 12th events in Charlottesville. Over the course of 3 working days, Donald Trump figured out a way to get firmly and even defiantly on the wrong side of it all. In a pair of transparently strained attempts at being presidential, Trump struggled to muster a condemnation of literal fascism on the literal march. He identified the presence of very fine people on both the fascist and anti-fascist sides of what is honestly not a working binary. And he reversed the phrase truly bad people for the news media. He reserved the phrase, and I guess really reversed. He reserved the phrase truly bad people for the news media, to whom I'll talk uncensored and uninterrupted and unstaffed for half an hour because they're with my friend Chris Ruddy eating at my golf club. There you go. Biggest brain in history. So he reserved the phrase truly bad people for the news media, which had been so unfair in their response. By Tuesday, the issue was once again the media's selective and slanted and dishonest treatment of him. By Thursday morning, Trump was tweeting mournfully about the tragedy of Confederate monuments being removed from public parks. He finally sounded like himself again. Among the segment of the population that's put off by things like a president refusing to forcefully condemn Nazi rioters, this has raised some uncomfortable questions about Trump's beliefs. Does he really share any or many of the beliefs with the racists and nationalists and racist nationalists who made his campaign their cause? Or is this a political calculation against criticizing a small but important part of his base? Was his decision to defend statues of famous slave masters a reflection of his perspective on history, or maybe a darkly strategic reading of the national political mood? Did he not know that what he said was historically incoherent and obviously wrong? It's right to wonder, but we should be past asking these questions about this man at this point. And that was in August. And it was late then. The most significant thing to know about Donald Trump's politics or process, his beliefs or his calculations, is that he is, and we'll change it a little bit for radio, an a-hole. I think I've said as much on Twitter. The only salient factor in any decision he makes is that he absolutely does not care about the interests of the parties involved except as they reflect upon him. Start with this, and you already know a lot. Start with this, and you already know that there are no real answers to any of these questions. I think this largely just basically says what I said this morning. There's no article that explains them. Here's an article explaining why there's no article that could possibly explain them. It's an inherent contradiction. Okay, we can live with that. It is not quite fair to say that Donald Trump lacks core beliefs, but to the extent, I always say that one, to the extent that we can take apart these beliefs, they amount to give Donald Trump your money, and Donald Trump should really be on television more. And that's really it. I think that sums it up. The only comprehensible through line to his politics is that everything Trump says is something he's said previously, with additional verys and mores appended over time. His worldview amounts to the sum of the dumb crap he saw on the cover of the New York Post in 1985, subjected to a few decades of rancid compounding interest and deteriorating mental aptitude. There's more. Can you handle it? We'll take a short break. I don't know if you can wait. 1 minute. We'll be back with more. Welcome back to the Kagro. Welcome back to the Frog in the Throat in the Morning show. Holy cow. We'll see if we can get rid of this music and then therefore the frog in my throat as well, and continue at least briefly with the rest of this Donald Trump rant, although honestly it's not news and I feel badly for spending this much time on it, but I don't know. Feels like a Friday rant worth doing. Matthew Rigdon, by the way, listening along, says, your comments about small town mayors and police show that you live in an urban bubble. Little smiley face there. As people say in the small town where I am, the only qualification to be sheriff is to pass high school. To be mayor, all you need is a pulse. And I don't know. So was it the comments that mayors are smart too? I live in an urban bubble. I'm a suburban person, obviously. I think I've said as much. I haven't logged a great deal of time in the great cities of America as a resident. It's not small town, but it's not, of course, it's not urban, but we live in an urban television market, media market. So it's semi-urban, I guess. Ex-urban now. Anyway, all right. So he's not really offended. That's fine. And let's see. We should continue to round this up. And I know I do have other stories for you. I'll give you this. If you've been waiting for the real stuff, we'll get to it in this hour. But I like this article. It was a good recommendation from Paul. I'll continue with this, and I'll just start over with basically what the hell's in his brain was this paragraph here. It's not quite fair to say that Donald Trump lacks core beliefs, but to the extent that we can take apart these beliefs, they amount to give Donald Trump more of your money, and Donald Trump really should be on television more. Yes. And I like the turn of phrase about basically his worldview amounts to the dumb crap, it's the S word here, he saw on the cover of the New York Post in 1985, subjected to a few decades of rancid compounding interest and deteriorating mental aptitude. He watches a lot of cable news, but he struggles to follow even stories that have been custom built for people like him, old, uninformed, amorphously, if deeply aggrieved. He still can't follow it. It's true. There's a reason for this. Thank God. Now we know. Trump doesn't know anything or really believe anything about any topic beyond himself, because he has no interest in any topic beyond himself. His evident cognitive decline and hyperactive laziness and towering monomania ensure that he will never again learn a new thing in his life. He has no friends and no real allies. His inner circle is divided between ostensibly scandalized cynics and theatrically shameless ones, all of whom hold him in low regard and see him as a potential means to their individuated ends. There is no help on the way. His outer orbit is a rotation of replacement-level rage grandpas and defective, perpetually clammy operators. I don't even know what the links are for these things, but I'm interested in finding out. Trump now executes by way of the Junior Soprano method. When he senses that his staff is trying to get him to do one thing, Trump defiantly does the opposite. Otherwise, he bathes in the commodified reactionary grievance of partisan media, looking for stories about himself. It takes days for his oafish and overmatched handlers to coax him into even a coded and qualified criticism of neo-Nazis. And for an instant, an instant for him to willfully undo it. Of course, he brings more vigor to the latter than the former. He doesn't really understand why he had to do the first thing, but he innately and deeply understands why he did the second. The first is invariably about someone else, some woman. There was a car accident, like during or maybe after that thing, and therefore, as an a-hole, he does not and really cannot care about it. The second is about him, and therefore, as an a-hole, he really, really does care. To understand Trump is also to understand his appeal as an aspirational brand to the worst people in the United States. And I would add probably the world. That's why the Russians love him so much. Not the Russian government. They love him for a different reason. Russian people like him because they love garbage. If it's got an American English word plastered on it. If you ever spent any time I don't know if it's still the same. If you ever spent any time, as I did, traveling in Europe in the 80s, was maybe a unique experience. Maybe it's true still. Like the biggest selling item of clothing, the further east you got, the more this was the case. The biggest selling clothing items were, garbage, whatever. It's just crap clothes, but it had English words plastered on it. At random. Seriously. Like, I don't know. The thing that cracked us up when we were touring. Where were we? I don't know. It might even have been in Spain, which is not that far west, but we saw similar things all over the place. But it's not west at all, really, or rather east, I should say. It is very west. It's not, but somebody was walking around with a shirt on that said Mustache Club on it. Like, what? But it's English. I don't know what that means. Right. Well, and I don't know what it was. I guess, maybe it's less in countries where they actually do speak English widespread, as a second language. And it's more popular in countries where there's fewer English second language speakers because I guess the better you are at English and a lot of Western Europe, northern Western Europe is very good with that. And I don't know, maybe they didn't see the wisdom of buying Mustache Club shirts. We also saw some graffiti, like somebody thought it was like the toughest thing in the world to do. The most American hardcore thing to do is spray English graffiti in Spain. Ooh, that's English. That's like New York City. That's super tough. So totally American. I think we saw somebody had, vicious thug that he was, had spray painted, big fart on a wall somewhere. The words big fart, but they had changed their mind somewhere along the line. They had written, how did they put this? They were not sure, I guess, of their English. And the sum total of what was on there with some of the words crossed out when they changed their minds and realized, oh, I don't want this word, I want that word, and describing fart. But reading it, all I remember now is reading the words in order to one another and cracking up about it. That it said, wet, dry, fart, big fart on the wall there. Now they had crossed out dry. that they had said, oh, haha, you know what's even worse than a fart? It's a dry fart. Wait, no, I forgot. And it's the opposite. I forgot. I'm trying to remember my English from school. Wet, dry. Wet is this word I'm thinking. Okay, wait, crossed out dry. Wet over the word crossed out dry, fart. And then what, was a small fart? No, that's not good. Big. That's the one way. So wet fart, big fart was the eventual message of that. That was what they came up with. And how the hell did I get to this? Oh, well, just basically that once I made it to Russia at that point, they were crazy for anything obviously American. This was still the time when you could eat like a king for a week if you were willing to give a Russian person a pair of Levi's, right? Or that everything was available in exchange for American cigarettes. And again, they had no idea what was current in America, right? I think I've told this story before. I had gone to Russia knowing this with several cartons of Marlboros, figuring that's the most American of cigarettes. And they had no idea and didn't want any of them. And they said, Kent is the cigarette we're looking for. That should give you some clue about what they think about Americans. The most fabulous, amazing American thing in the world, the thing I know as a Russian with an innate understanding of America, which I've studied closely and understand thoroughly, is Americans love Kent cigarettes. And when it comes to people, the most American person is Donald Trump. And if you want to be American or look American, the thing you need to aspire to do is save up enough money to buy a Donald Trump apartment. Then you will personify America. You will go to America and they will not be able to tell that you're a Russian mobster. You are an American through and through, probably born in America, 3 generations deep. You smoke Kents, you got some Levi's, and you live in a Trump building. So there you go. All right, I remember how we got here. To understand Trump is to also understand that his appeal as an aspirational brand to the worst people in the United States and the world. What his intransigent admirers like most about him, the thing they aspire to in their online cosplay sessions and their desperately thirsty performances for a media they loathe and to which they are so helplessly addicted, is his freedom to be unconcerned with anything but himself. And I guess that's largely true. I mean, that's a lot of what drives the alt-right. We keep saying all they really want on the alt-right is to upset people or to drive people bananas or twist the knife on people and make them angry and upset because it's about them. And that's why when they go to marches, they dress like him. Why do the alt-right neo-Nazis march in khakis and white polo shirts? Because that's what Trump golfs in. The end. That's the whole thing. Anyway, this freedom to be unconcerned with anything but himself and their addiction to it, this is not because he is rich or brave or astute, though that helps. It's because he's an a-hole. And so authentically unconcerned. The howling and unreflective void at his core will keep him lonely and stupid until the moment a sufficient number of his vital organs finally resign in disgrace. But it liberates him to devote every bit of his being to his pursuit of himself. Actual hate and actual love, as other people feel them, are too complicated to fit into this world. In their place, for Trump and for the people who see him in a way of being that they are too busy or burdened or humane to pursue, are the versions that exist in a lower orbit around the self. Instead of hate, there is simple resentment, abject and valueless and recursively self-pitying. Instead of love, there is the blank, sucking nullity of vanity and appetite. This is what an a-hole is. And Lord knows Trump is not the only one in his business or our culture who insistently bends every incident or issue back towards his sour and jealous self. Some of the people who do this even care at some level about the broader world, but because they are a-holes, believe that the solution to that world's problems lies in paying more attention to one particular a-hole and his or her ideas. Trump is not one of those people. The rest of the world is an abstraction to him, a market to exploit. There is no other person in it who is real to him. They're all supplicants or subjects, fans or haters. But their humanity is transparently not part of the equation. What other people might want, or indeed the fact that they could want at all, is crowded out of the picture by the corroded and corrosive bulk of his horrible self. There is no room for other people in the world that Trump... Gotta have a pop-up right in the way of that one. There is no room for other people in the world that Trump has made for himself, and this is fundamental to the anxiety of watching him impose his claustrophobic and airless interior world on our own. Is Trump a racist? Yes, because that's the default setting for stupid people. Also, he transparently has no regard for other people at all. Does Trump care about the cheap-looking statue of Stonewall Jackson that some forgotten Dixiecrat placed in a crap hole park somewhere he will never visit? Not really. But he so resents the fact that other people expect him to care that he develops a passionate contrary opinion out of spite. Does he even know about... Well, let me stop you there. The answer is no. The answer is always no. And it will always be no because he does not care. Every lie, every evasion, every massive and blithely issued shock to the conscience Trump authors will only ever be about him. He will never be embarrassed by any of these things because he cannot understand anyone's response to them except as it relates to him. Slavery? That's another thing that his very dishonest enemies want to blame him for. Racism? He's been accused of it, and honestly, it's so ridiculous, so ridiculous. Not even an answer, right? History? He's not in the business of making it, baby. Violence? Not his fault. People protesting? He doesn't know them. This is the horror at the whole of every a-hole. And it is why Trump will never get better as a president or a person. It will always and only be about him. History matters only insofar as it brought him to this moment. The roaring and endless present in which he lives matters because it is where he is now. The future is this place in which he will do it all again. Trump's world ends with him, and a discourse or a politics that is locked into scrutinizing or obsessively #resisting or otherwise chasing him will invariably end up as arid and abstracted and curdled as he is. More to the point, it's a dead end. The shame an animal feels is secret to us. Well, I don't know if I reach the same conclusion, but I certainly like the setup, and I'll take it for that. And I encourage you to go on with your resistance as previously prescribed, not by myself or anyone else in particular, although I thought Paula did a pretty good job with it on our Monday show. All right, I promised that there was other news, and there really is, and I'm going to get to it. And let's see, which is the most important direction to go with this? Well, there are a couple of things. One of which is that Devin Nunes is a terrible moron and is getting himself in trouble again. And there's a story that involves him. The New York Times had this one. Conservative website first funded the anti-Trump research by the firm that later produced the infamous Steele dossier. Here's an interesting twist for you. The Washington Free Beacon. This reported, by the way, by Maggie Haberman and also Ken Vogel. The Washington Free Beacon, a conservative website funded by a major Republican donor, and a garbage site at that, first hired the research firm that months later produced for Democrats the salacious dossier describing ties between Donald Trump and the Russian government, the website said on Friday. How do you like that? And it was some time ago on Friday. This is October 27th, 2017 is this story. The new news is that the owner, Paul Singer, I guess, the founder of this website, is a big Republican donor and won I guess, kicked this dossier off and funded its beginnings. And 2, is a big donor to Devin Nunes, who is, of course, insisting we got to find out who started this research on this terrible, totally fake news dossier and string him up. Oh, he's one of my major donors. That's the big twist. The Free Beacon, funded in large part by the New York hedge fund billionaire Paul Singer, there we are, there's the funder, not the founder of the Free Beacon, but the funder, hired the firm Fusion GPS in 2015 to unearth damaging information about several Republican presidential candidates, including Mr. Trump. But the Free Beacon told the firm to stop doing research on Mr. Trump in May 2016 as Mr. Trump was clinching the Republican nomination. In other words, they lit this thing on fire and they're like, oh God, put it out, he's the nominee. And now we know about it. Hillary Clinton's campaign and a Democratic National Committee had begun paying Fusion GPS in April for research that eventually became the basis of the dossier. The Free Beacon informed the House Intelligence Committee on Friday, back in October, that it had retained the firm. The committee is one of a number of congressional committees investigating Russian attempts to disrupt the election. You know all of that. And, of course, it is chaired by Devin Nunes, who now, in addition to inserting himself in various illegal and stupid ways into and obstructing ways into the investigation, trying to put out the fire all of a sudden, once again, now caught with his pants down. And it turns out that one of his major donors is the guy who started this whole thing. And golly gee whiz, isn't it an embarrassment, except who cares, because there's a whole world out there that believes Donald Trump doesn't play golf or watch television. And we'll just talk to those people instead and see if we survive our election. That's one of the things that I wanted to bring up to you. How about something a little bit more in the abstract? But you know it's a valuable and important piece of information because David Dayen wrote it. Seriously, I actually believe that about David Dayen. And so I'm going to bring it up. Oh my gosh, you know what? No, I'm completely wrong. I have a new hero, I guess. Sharon Lerner wrote this. I saw David sharing it, and he writes for The Intercept all the time. And this is the sort of thing that he very often discovers. I still believe that to be true about David Dayen, but I guess I'll now be open to the possibility that Sharon Lerner, too, is also a genius. Anyway, she came up with this very, very important story. I think it's just generally important. It's not, spot on any one or another of the Trump scandals. It's just sort of more of the same. The focus inside the Trump administration, where you want to lay this, is Scott Pruitt, the EPA administrator. And I guess maybe before I even get to this one, which is super important, I should tell you, bring you up to date on what a complete wacko Scott Pruitt really is. And I know a couple of days ago I set aside for inclusion in the show an excellent recitation of all the problems with Pruitt, written by Mark Sumner over at Daily Kos. And I am fairly certain that it was, in fact, Mark Sumner who wrote it. Yes. And he, too, is someone you should always be reading. Really, basically, just don't stop reading Daily Kos, ever, is my answer. Plus, I think we'd throw in Lerner and Dayen as well. Why not? Then there's many more than that. But Scott Pruitt, Mark wrote back in, way back on December 19th, is paranoid, preposterous, and absolutely out of control. Lots of primary sources work their way into this one, but this is a great summary, just to bring you up to speed on Pruitt. And then I'll tell you the real kicker, I guess, after our last break. The EPA, Mark says, doesn't have the task of promoting oil and gas. It doesn't have the task of promoting anything outside the U.S., and yet Scott Pruitt and his team of personal guards, remember he travels with an entourage, a security entourage of like 24 people, just got back from sampling the couscous at an extended Moroccan vacation. Why? I don't know. Quoting the Washington Post, the purpose of the trip sparked questions from environmental groups, Democratic lawmakers, and some industry experts who noted that EPA plays no formal role in overseeing natural gas exports. Such activities are overseen primarily by the Energy Department and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Pruitt took along 7 aides and an undisclosed number of staff from his protective detail. The group included 4 political aides, including Samantha Dravis, Associate Administrator of the Office of Policy, And senior advisors Sarah Greenwalt and Lincoln Ferguson, as well as one career official, Jane Nishida, Principal Deputy Assistant Administrator of the Office of International and Tribal Affairs. The undisclosed number of bodyguards, Mark continues, could be as many as 30, since Pruitt just added 12 more. That's $2 million in salaries alone, by the way, before you add on training, equipping, and flying them to Morocco for all-you-can-eat pastilla. Is that what you do when you get to Morocco? Okay, it's not clear how many of Pruitt's staff are employed as food tasters. He is very paranoid. Like all Pruitt events, the news about his Moroccan adventure, and I didn't really even hear much about that, was only made public after his return because Pruitt refuses to publish his schedule in advance out of, quote, security concerns. He's got immense security concerns. I have never heard of an assassination attempt against an Environmental Protection Agency administrator before, but I guess he's not going to be the first, damn it. And Pruitt got special permission, Mark continues, to upgrade his flights, by the way, to business class at a cost of several $1,000s per ticket, also out of, quote, security concerns. Meanwhile, back at home, Pruitt has demonstrated his obsessive paranoia, not just with his ever-growing staff of bodyguards, but with his determination to make sure no one ever overhears a word he says. Again, excerpted from The Hill, this time the EPA paid $3,000 in March to Edwin Steinmetz Associates to do a sweep for covert/illegal surveillance devices in Administrator Scott Pruitt's office at the agency's Washington, D.C. headquarters, documents provided to The Hill show. The bug sweeps are on top of Pruitt's custom-made cone of silence, which allows him to talk without being overheard. None of which makes the least bit of sense. Scott Pruitt is not only a public servant, he's a public servant with a very domestic agenda. No other EPA official has ever felt any compulsion to ask for any of this. Just what is Pruitt hiding? What possible justification can the man in charge of enforcing the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, and an agency where there is almost no classified information, have for putting in something literally called a sensitive compartmented information facility? Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Scott Pruitt, reports CNN in this case, is known for mandating note-free meetings. He is the only administrator to have requested his own 24/7 security detail, and now he's about to have his own soundproof booth. That's what we were just talking about. The EPA spending close to $25,000 to construct a secure space for Pruitt within the agency, according to government contracting records first obtained and reported by the Washington Post. Scott Pruitt is doing something that requires that no one take notes. Something that requires that his office be swept for bugs. Something that requires he have a soundproof booth in his office. And that's just the start. Now an excerpt from the New York Times. Mr. Pruitt, according to the employees who requested anonymity out of fear of losing their jobs, often makes important phone calls from other offices rather than use the phone in his office, and he is accompanied, even at EPA headquarters, by armed guards. The first head of the agency ever to request round-the-clock security. Armed guards inside the EPA buildings, where there's armed guards at the outside, of course. And interesting, I want to pay $3,000 to sweep my office for bugs, $25,000 to build a cone of silence secure facility inside my office so no one can overhear me say anything. And on top of that, I'm going to make all my phone calls outside of the office I just paid $28,000 to secure. I don't even know if that's a good idea. It's just weird. These are precautions, or rather, these precautions aren't unusual. They are insane. No EPA chief has ever had anything like these requirements. No president has ever had anything like these requirements. No director of the CIA has anything like these requirements. I don't know about that. To support his continually expanding ranks of personal guards, Pruitt ignored a hiring freeze and budgetary limits, even though the enforcement budget of the EPA was being severely cut and scientists were being forced out. If you're wondering, Pruitt's personal security now costs about 63% as much as it costs to guard the Pope. and one of the two is working to cut that cost. This isn't caution. If Republicans are genuinely concerned that someone in Washington is planning a coup, the guy who is obsessed with secrecy, meeting with foreign leaders for no apparent reason, and building a personal army might be a place to start. If you're wondering about those other folks that we know who went to Morocco, Samantha Davis, it says here, not Dravis, but anyway, is an attorney whose previous work involved helping Republican attorney generals attack environmental laws. Sarah Greenwald and Lincoln Ferguson were ferried to the EPA by Pruitt from his office in Oklahoma. We'll tell you a little bit more about them after this. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Winding things up on Friday. I know it's been obsessive about Trump and his cronies, but we were in the concluding paragraph, actually, of the Scott Pruitt wrap-up that Mark Sumner provided for us the other day. The cronies that went along to Morocco, as we said, Samantha Davis, an attorney whose previous work involved helping Republican attorneys general attack environmental laws. Sarah Greenwald and Lincoln Ferguson ferried to the EPA by Pruitt from his office in Oklahoma, where they were involved in several of his own scandals. Note that, because we're going to move on to another one of them in just a minute. And Jane Nishida, she was the career EPA employee, actually has some environmental experience, including working for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, which Pruitt and Trump defunded. So that brings you up to speed pretty much on just sort of where this guy is in terms of wackiness. Now, one more specific example, Sharon Lerner, her piece in The Intercept. This is as much about Pruitt as it is, I guess, about Trump who chose Pruitt, as it is about the guy involved in this story. And it's a hell of a story, and it has to be, because you will note in deeper into the story, there's a much bigger, more splashy, I think, headline to be had from this. But this is an interesting and alarming story all by itself, and it has to be a pretty big one in order to cover up this other fact. It doesn't cover it up. She lays it out. But here it is. Here's the headline. Banned from the banking industry for life. Again, banned from the banking industry for life. I did not even know that could happen. A Scott Pruitt friend finds a new home at the EPA. Why would that happen? Let's find out. The Environmental Protection Agency has tasked a banker who was banned from the banking industry for life with oversight of the nation's Superfund program. Now, that doesn't make any sense, and it's probably near criminal in its negligence and malignance, yes. But wait till we get around to finding out about this whole banker and being banned for life and why it is and who he was and et cetera, et cetera. But let's focus on the EPA side for just a second. In May, that's not even where the story goes. The story first tells us about the banning. In May, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation fined Oklahoma banker Albert Kelly $125,000. That does not seem like a lot for a banker, but there you go. According to a consent order, which The Intercept obtained through a Freedom of Information Act, the FDIC had, quote, reason to believe that Kelly violated a law or regulation by entering into an agreement pertaining to a loan by the bank without FDIC approval. Now, I don't know what their paperwork really is, but apparently he's made a loan essentially that the FDIC says, yeah, you shouldn't have been making that. That's basically, there's probably some fraud involved in all of that, but it doesn't say so in the consent order. But that's the deal. A consent order saying they have reason to believe he violated a law or regulation, and so he's going to get punished. 2 weeks later, after this consent order, that is, after 2 weeks after this May consent order, 2 weeks later, EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt appointed Kelly to lead an effort to streamline the Superfund program. In July, the FDIC went further, banning Kelly from banking for life. I didn't even know they could do that. The order of prohibition from further participation, that would be the official document that banned him, explained that the FDIC had determined Kelly's unfitness to serve as a director, officer, person participating in the conduct of affairs of an institution or as an institution-affiliated party of the bank, any other insured depository institution. Essentially, so unfit for banking that he couldn't be allowed to participate in it as a director or officer or operating a bank in any capacity ever. You could still save money in someone else's bank if you want to. You're not banned from using banks. You just can't work at any of them. But administer the Superfund site. Why not? Because there's only billions of dollars to be working with there. I guess you're probably going to steal them now. It's not banking, though. They just said, this is great. Pruitt says, well, you're a friend of mine. And you'll find out what kind of friend he is in just a minute. The FDIC doesn't trust you around large pools of money in banks, so you're banned from banking. Well, where else can I find large pools of money? Well, I got an idea. How about the EPA? We get a huge budget. You want to come steal that? I don't know well, that's not a bank, right? Do you keep your money in a bank? No, keep it in a treasury. Excellent. I'll do it. So he does. There you go. That's where we're getting our people from. Now, why does he like Kelly so much? Well, here's the answer. Pruitt, who has received loans from Kelly's bank, could that be it? It could be. I mean, I get loans from banks too. That doesn't mean I'm friends with the banker, right? Well, in this case, of course it does. And of course, he's getting loans of the type you and I will never get. Of course, you knew that was coming, right? Pruitt, who has received loans from Kelly's bank, apparently didn't find Kelly's unfitness to serve in the financial industry as disqualifying his longtime friend from serving as a top official at the EPA. Since May, why would it, right? He's my friend. He's a good guy. He steals a lot of money, but he's a good guy. Gives it to me. Since May, Kelly, or Kel, as he's known in Oklahoma, has led the effort to streamline, maybe, the Superfund program, which oversees remediation of some of the country's most toxic sites. And by the way, one good definition of streamlining, so I'll streamline the Superfund program. How much money is in the account for Superfund? $10 billion. Well, suppose I take 9 of those and leave 1. Now I have streamlined the Superfund program. See? Perfect. Now, why does Pruitt love Kelly so much? Well, here's an interesting fact. Pruitt earned only $38,400 as an Oklahoma state senator, one of his previous jobs. He moved on to become Attorney General of Oklahoma, made considerably more money in that job. But prior to that, he was an Oklahoma state senator, and I guess didn't have much more income than that. $38,400. That's not a lot, right? Now, even with a $35,000 profit from selling his previous home, that was not enough on its own to buy a house in the Lakes at Indian Springs community in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, the suburb of Tulsa that Pruitt represented in the legislature. Yet in 2004, that's when this is happening, Pruitt purchased a sprawling ranch house in the upscale gated community for $605,000. Now, it's a $600,000 house in Oklahoma, Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. Really the kind of home that somebody with $38,000 of annual income should be buying. Not without a subprime loan, I would say. Located on a half-acre corner lot in the lakes, his stately Tudor looked out on a man-made lake and had a stone fireplace, parking for 5 cars. All $38,000 employees have 5 cars, and a storm-safe room, which you probably do need to have if you can get it in Oklahoma. To help pay for it, Pruitt turned to Spirit Bank. Oh my God, it's Spirit Banking. I knew it. There was some occult, all right, sure. No write-up of that, by the way. A community bank, Spirit Bank is, that Kelly's family had run since the 1930s, that heyday of banking. But really, it is pretty sad when you think about it. This family-run bank since the 1930s, and this guy is such a greedy a-hole, he ruins it. I mean, I would feel some special obligation to maintain the bank that my father and grandfather had run and gave it to me. By the way, son, here's a bank in case you need a career or anything. Spirit Bank gave Pruitt and his wife 3 mortgage loans. Remember, $38,400 of annual income. 3 mortgage loans, one for $81,000, another for $359,000, and a third for $533,000. His wife, Marilyn Pruitt, has reported no assets or income. $38,000 annual income. Here's what, 533, 6, 7, 8. I don't know whether this, like, each one subsumes the next or whatever, but at minimum, even if each new mortgage includes and subsumes the last, he's sitting on a $533,000 mortgage with $38,000 of annual income. The year before, Spirit Bank had also loaned Pruitt money to help him buy, are you ready for this? $38,000 salary, right? $650,000 house. Spirit Bank loaned Pruitt money to help him buy a share of the Oklahoma City Red Hawks, a minor league baseball team. It's what all the kids who are making 38 grand are collecting, right? That deal was made in partnership with a local businessman named Robert Funk, co-founder of an employment company. Clearly, you can see since way back, Pruitt has basically been on the take from the wealthy businessmen of the Broken Arrow, Oklahoma community. They're making sweetheart deals with him, selling him $650,000 homes, giving him mortgages that he doesn't qualify for, and going in halvesies with him, quote unquote. Yeah, the guy could put up zero cash, right? On buying minor league baseball teams. What kind of investment is that even for a rich guy? On May 22nd, Pruitt returned the favor to the Oklahoma banker with his announcement that he would be creating the Superfund Task Force and appointing Kelly to head it. The appointment was notable in that Kelly would become a senior advisor in the Federal Environmental Agency despite having no previous experience with environmental issues. That was another big story the other day we didn't get time to discuss about a regional administrator being appointed in the Midwest, upper Midwest, I think, right? Or Michigan area, perhaps, who also had no college degree, among other things, which, you would hope for in a science-based organization, but basically was an environmental nightmare, but was a friend of somebody's and ended up getting the job. We didn't even get to note that one. The appointment, again, was notable in that Kelly would become a senior advisor at the EPA, no previous experience with environmental issues, a business major with a law degree. It's not like he didn't have something else to fall back on, and a 200-head cattle ranch. Kelly listed, this is interesting too, motivational speaking and political activity among the core competencies on his resume. Clearly, he's a political operator. That's true. It's interesting, motivational speaking. And I suppose if I skated on everything and I need a career. Oh, hey, thanks for the bank, Dad. Oh, also, I'll get a law degree. And by the way, if I'm banned from banking for life, I can get a sweet job at the EPA. People are giving me money all over the place. I guess I would think, well, maybe I could be a motivational speaker. I guess I could do anything, right? My speech would be, I don't really know how you're going to get your life to be better, but maybe if you just sit around and wait, someone will hand something to you, like your dad could give you a bank. That's pretty motivational, right? I didn't say he was a good motivational speaker. The descendant of a long line of bankers and Republicans, of course, Kelly had worked at his family's bank for the previous 33 years. Got a law degree, he's a motivational speaker, he's a political operator, he's got a cattle ranch, he's got a job at the bank. 33 years he's been working in banking. That's pretty serious. And really, even if you had been working there, if you had established it yourself and worked there 33 years, I'd be afraid of trashing it. I'd be super afraid of trashing it if my parents and grandparents had given it to me on top of all that. It's unclear whether Spirit's loans to Pruitt violated the bank's lending standards because those standards aren't public, and also because Pruitt may have used assets and income as collateral that don't appear in public records, maybe because they aren't his even. Pruitt, Kelly, and the EPA declined to comment or answer any questions for this story. For Kelly, who has contributed to Pruitt's campaigns on at least 3 occasions, the appointment came just as he found himself in need of a job. Did he really? I mean, he was banned from banking, it's true, but he owned the bank, and so supposedly, I guess, somebody else runs it, he could sell the shares. He also had a 200-head cattle ranch. He was a lawyer. He, whatever. He's got lots of things going on, but now he needs a job, quote unquote. Now, few knew at the time that the banking scion was already well on his way to being forced out of his family business, which had been run by his uncle and grandfather before him. Okay, not his dad. And being banned from banking altogether. The FDIC's order of prohibition against Kelly provided a few more details about what the banker had done to get himself banned from the banking business for life, a dubious distinction that befell 96 bankers in 2016. The 2017 figures not yet available. So it does happen. Now, the FDIC has been known to levy this penalty on certain bankers convicted of criminal fraud. And the federal regulator has also issued lifetime banking bans for some leaders of failed banks. But we don't know exactly what it was that did it for him. According to the order Kelly signed, his violation, quote, of law or regulation, unsafe or unsound practice, and or breach of fiduciary duty, unquote, caused the bank financial loss or other damage. It had also involved his willful or continuing disregard for the safety or soundness of the bank. Despite repeated FOIA requests from The Intercept, the FDIC has declined to release more information about the particular violations that led to Kelly's fine and lifetime ban from banking, but public records show that Spirit Bank suffered significant losses under his leadership, going at least as far back as 2007. And we know what was going on in 2007 and leading up into 2008, right? At its peak, the bank had $1.5 billion in assets, according to Kelly's resume, which does not indicate when that was the case. Today, it has less than half that amount, just over $700 million. Still a lot of money, right? But less than half of what it had. And as banks go, not very big. Clearly, some of its troubles had to do with making bad mortgages, home loans that borrowers were unable to pay back. The troubled asset ratio is a number that approximates a bank's stability by comparing the amount of troubled assets to its holdings that bank regulators consider solid. Generally, the higher the measure, the more stress a bank is under because of lenders, or rather borrowers, I think, who are not paying on time. In 2007, Spirit Bank's troubled asset ratio reached 34, meaning just over 1/3 of its holdings were troubled. You can see how that 34, apparently, in this case anyway, roughly equivalent to about 34% of its holdings. 34 ratio. So 1/3 of its holdings troubled. Nationwide, the median troubled asset ratio for banks at the time was 12. Now, in March 2009, Spirit Bank received $30 million from the Troubled Asset Relief Program. Remember TARP? A federal effort to breathe new life into troubled banks by buying up some of their bad loans. Spirit Bank decided to participate in the program, quote, because we see it as an opportunity to help Oklahoma, Kelly said at the time. Because Spirit Bank is one of the state's strongest banks, and because our unique position in providing home mortgage financing across the state, we are well positioned to deploy this money to stimulate the Oklahoma economy. All of which, of course, was untrue. It wasn't one of the state's strongest banks. It was one of the weakest. But hey, free money, so they took it. Yet Spirit Bank's finances only got shakier in the years after it received the federal bailout funds, which the bank used to make even more mortgages, and more to the point, even more bad ones. The added capital resulted in approximately $400 million of additional residential mortgage loans funded in 2009, the bank made clear in a report to the Treasury that year. In 2010, the bank made more mortgages, and its troubled asset ratio climbed to over 60. Now, you were supposed to lend the money out. That's true. They were one of the few banks, I guess, actually lending the money out and making more loans available because the money had showed up, as opposed to just keeping it and paying bonuses with it. But look what happened. Troubled asset ratio goes from 34 to over 60. You're supposed to make good loans, guys. The next year, as Spirit Bank continued to make mortgages, Kelly was named, this is great, this is the part that I can't believe is the headline. Kelly was named chairman of the American Bankers Association. What? Now that means, of course, that you're pulling somebody from Spirit Bank in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, a bank that at its peak had $1.5 billion in assets, now has troubled assets over 64 or over 60% of its holdings, right? And that's the American Bankers Association. Well, we got to look it throughout America and try and find somebody who's a really good banker to head our Bankers Association. How about $1.5 billion Broken Arrow Spirit Bank that has a 60+ troubled asset ratio? Okay. Based on what? Tom Coburn, then one of the state's senators, commended Kelly on the appointment, describing him as, quote, the most influential non-politician in Oklahoma. That really does say something, doesn't it? Who is this guy? Once he became chair of the ABA, Kelly spoke out against federal regulation of banking, a position Pruitt shared out of concern, he said, for community banks, like this one. Kelly was also chair of the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority, a powerful entity in charge of building the state's roads. It's a whole other can of worms. What I was saying, though, earlier on is why is this the headline versus the other headline? Here, this could easily have been the headline. Former chairman of the American Bankers Association, banned from banking for life. That's not the headline, though, because an even bigger, badder, dumber story is, now that he's banned from banking for life, former chair of the American Banking Association as he is, he's administering the Superfund site for crazy, paranoid, a-hole thief Scott Pruitt. Now, what do I mean by thief? Well, there's more to the story. It goes on to say, yet even as Kelly's public profile rose, his bank continued to falter. In the first quarter of 2012, Spirit Bank's troubled asset ratio topped 70, and the FDIC stepped in to try to stabilize it. That year, in a consent order with the FDIC and the Oklahoma State Banking Department, the bank agreed to 25 improvements to its practices. Among the changes to be instituted were requirements that loans be supported by current credit information and collateral documentation, like everybody else in the world. And that loans, because apparently they weren't at this point, and that loans to bank executive officers, directors, and principal shareholders be thoroughly reviewed. Thanks. Gee whiz. The order also specified that the bank shall retain qualified management, because they didn't have it, and that it come up with a policy for overseeing the business and entertainment expenses of its directors, officers, and employees, which had apparently gotten out of hand. Remember, it's a family-owned bank. At the peak of the subprime crisis, the median troubled asset ratio of banks nationwide was 15.1, peak of the subprime crisis. By the end of 2012, even after the infusion of federal dollars, Spirit Bank's troubled asset ratio had reached 75. Not 15, 75. Let's make him chairman of the American Bankers Association. Sure, why not? I suspect maybe he really was the most influential non-politician in Oklahoma after all. Otherwise, how could this have happened? Now, while most banks paid the Treasury back for the funds they've gotten through the TARP program with interest, Spirit Bank, curiously, unable to reimburse the government for more than $21 million of the $30 million it had received. Taxpayers lost 70% of the money they laid out for Spirit Bank, making it one of TARP's worst investments. Let's make him chairman of the bank. Let's make him the most influential guy. Let's put him at the EPA. Most bankers who failed to repay TARP funds were not penalized for their financial irresponsibility, and it is unclear whether this was a reason for Kelly's forced exit from banking. Yet, some Oklahomans did pay a price for the bad loans. Minorities were disproportionately affected, according to Angela Gobar, an academic who has studied the mortgage crisis in Oklahoma. She found that most subprime loans were made to borrowers in the middle and upper income brackets. In fact, amazingly enough, people who might have qualified for loans that were available on more favorable terms. But one of the things that was so illuminating to me was income didn't determine who banks targeted for unfavorable loans. She found that elevated foreclosure rates in census tracts with higher concentrations of residents of color, African Americans who could have afforded a prime loan, were instead steered by institutions like this one to get subprime loans. That's not the worst. When he was Oklahoma Attorney General, Pruitt opted out of a federal program that would have helped some of these foreclosure victims. In 2012, when the federal government and 49 state attorneys general launched a national mortgage settlement to offer relief to people who lost their homes in the crisis, Oklahoma became the one and only state to reject its share of $1.5 billion, and that ain't much, earmarked for individuals. Pruitt, who had been elected to the state attorney general's office in 2010, declined more than $10 million that could have gone to foreclosure victims in Oklahoma on the grounds that it penalized financially responsible homeowners. Like who? Well, at least one recipient of questionable loans survived the mortgage crisis unscathed. In 2012, Pruitt himself sold his house in the lakes at Indian Springs. He lost $62,000 on the deal, a modest setback considering the magnitude of the financial crisis. But the same year, when the FDIC was trying to stabilize Spirit Bank, Pruitt got an even bigger and grander house from which he borrowed from Spirit Bank, a stone mansion with more than 5,000 square feet of living space and 3 chimneys. By then, Pruitt was already Oklahoma Attorney General. That job pays $132,825 a year. Much better. Still, he needed another loan. This time, an $850,000 adjustable rate mortgage, but from the Bank of Oklahoma for this one. Though Pruitt now lives in Washington at an undisclosed address, he still owns his home in Tulsa. The interest rate on his mortgage is due to shoot up in 2022. Now, the program under Kelly's guidance is having money problems of its own. Although Scott Pruitt claims he's making Superfund a priority, he's also proposed cutting its budget. There's a total lack of congruence between what they say they're going to do and what's happening to the agency's staffing, said Tom Voltaggio, who directed the EPA's Superfund hazardous waste cleanup program in the mid-Atlantic states for more than 2 decades. It's all just BS, he says. For his part, Kelly's doing all right. At the helm of the program, his friend Pruitt holds up as evidence that he cares about the environment. The vanished banker now earns $172,100. A pretty decent salary, considering he also could have fallen back on the cattle ranch and the law degree and the history of the family having owned the bank, even though he can't direct it anymore. But, banking authorities say, nope, too incompetent or thiefish, greedy, and sticky-handed to be allowed back in banking. But why not have him run the bank for toxic waste cleanup here at the federal level? Scott Pruitt, I guess we get some sense of why he wants so much secrecy and why he won't allow anyone to take notes or find out what he's up to or listen to him on the phone. Not that he needs to be listening. Anybody, needs to let people listen. But pretty amazing that on a $38,000 salary, he buys a $650,000 home, $533-something $1,000 mortgage, buying shares of a baseball team, and of course, rejecting the one attorney general in the entire United States out of all 50 states to reject any federal help with people who had lost their homes in the financial crisis and the foreclosure mismanagement, because it would penalize responsible homeowners like him, who bought a $650,000 home on $38,000 of salary and then bumped himself up to an $850,000 home on a $100,000 salary while also buying shares in the local minor league baseball team. Super responsible. But apparently not an issue. I don't know. This guy seems to be out of control as well. But, we had thought, I guess, and we never thought he was one of the least corrupt. But remember when we were trying to decide who's the least corrupt cabinet member for Trump, and he couldn't even go to, dumb out of the way places like the Department of the Interior, because it turned out that Ryan Zinke was horribly corrupt as well. I don't think anybody ever had any illusions about Scott Pruitt and the EPA, but I guess once you look under the hood, besides his wacky penchant for secrecy, it turns out that there's a lot going on underneath there too, and now more cronyism than we originally were led to believe. It seems pretty upsetting. And I guess if you're depending on the EPA to pay any attention to the toxic waste dump in your neighborhood, you're going to have a long wait. Man, there seems to be a lot. Okay, well, there's lots to think about over the weekend, and hopefully we can record something for you for Monday, because I'd prefer not to do the show hungover, and I suppose you'd probably prefer not to listen to it hungover either. Anyway, don't drink so much, or at least hydrate this New Year's Eve so that you won't be hungover. But I'd like to be able to take that time. Yes, we realized, by the way, that I had done some now 254 original shows, 2-hour shows this year. We, I think, put ourselves on the line for you. Perhaps you could put yourself on the line for us if you have not yet done so, and visit our patreon.com site and kick in a couple of bucks to keep us going on a month-to-month basis so that we can continue the tradition of bringing you 250 plus brand new shows in 2018. Now, though, time to stay tuned for Justice Putnam to take over things on the Netroots radio airwaves with his West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, the Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. What do we got here? Let's see if we, of course, they'll be talking about the delusional New York Times interview. How could you possibly avoid it? And they'll also be looking at how Bitcoin is financing America's extremist right-wing and neo-Nazis.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Much more. Look at this. Trump fired the remaining members of the Presidential Advisory Council on HIV and AIDS with a letter delivered by FedEx. And mirroring national trends, New York City crime rates plunged to record lows, so you still can't go there for picante sauce. So the rest of America is justified in hating it, I guess. Stay tuned.